In this tutorial, I will not only be explaining how structure blocks terrain generation works, but why it does, so you can use it, implicate it, and find better techniques, maybe. Alrighty, so first what you're going to want to do is /give command. It's very simple, just /give as structure underscore block. And then what you're going to want to do is place it, set the offset, as I have done right here. If you want walls, you don't have to set the offset. The offset is basically just the coordinate, like, imagine it's sort of like a negative coordinate or a positive coordinate. It's like that, the backwards for the X and Z, basically. So then you're going to want to place two other, and you're going to want to set them to load number 1 or number 2, whichever you want this thing to be called. You can change the name, you just have to make sure it's consistent. So you notice right there, oh, that's why it's important to pay attention to offset. You want those cubes to line up and not be overlapping. It's very important. Well, I mean, I suppose you could, technically speaking, not do that, but you're not going to get the same result. And it's, I don't really know what's going to happen entirely. So technically speaking, you don't actually need the middle block, or what I mean by the corner block. You don't need the block in the corner. It's useful to have, but, you know, for this one, we're just going to delete it. And then this is, you know, it's important to set the offsets, especially because, you know, if you want a wall or... Now, you still see some overlapping. I'll change that in a minute. But make sure, so if you're a bit confused at what's happening, I advise watching a structure block video. I will link a good Bedrock Edition structure block guide in the channel that does that in the description. So, now that you have everything lined up, you can actually, technically speaking, you don't really need the middle one, so you can break it. You know, I kind of already said that, but you get the idea. You're gonna want to turn the borders off. So next, what you're gonna want to do is put some repeaters. That will delay it. It can be a, depending upon what the space you have, you'll have to change it, which might make things difficult. Touchscreen is kind of annoying. So what you're going to want to do is have a good amount of ticks, because each time the game is loading something in, and it can cause lag. So you're going to want to have it delayed, especially because you have to hit the lever and then really quickly go and save the structure block. Place the lever. Alright, so then you're going to want to... I don't even have it registered to number 1, so you're going to have to re-undo that. So make sure everything is set to number 1. That's very important. I would advise turning off the bounding box of the border. So all those white lines will go away, basically. So as you can see, it's infinitely traveling on, and you can use this to make terrain generation. Towards the end of the video, I'll demonstrate, actually, some terrain generation that I've made. A reducing lag technique is make it play an animation in the little settings of slowly place layer by layer. However, this can cause any things that require to be on the ceiling to not be able to work, like glowberries, dripstone, etc., etc. So that can cause problems. Now, this is a pretty small timer, and it's also a bunch of smaller ones. I would advise a little bigger and a longer timer. Because, I mean, depending upon how much area you want your players to have to work with, depends upon how much bigger you want it. It goes on forever. But what can happen sometimes, you might catch it a few times, is chunk overlap. You see every time the redstone flashes, that's chunk overlap. Now, because each one loads itself in 2 directions, you might have noticed that it'll actually load itself in itself. And every time that flash is a chunk overlap, every time that flash, it's reloading, which can cause lag. And also, if you have entities turned on, can spawn in hundreds of entities within seconds, causing massive, massive lag and massive problems. So basically what chunk overlapping is it's basically hitting the load button over and over again. Every time that redstone flashes, it's a sign of it reloading, as you can see the redstone flashing there. And I turn on entities, I want to just demonstrate. This would be one singular chunk with minimum chunk overlapping. The farther you go, and the more you load in, the more chunk overlapping there can be, and that's a lot of sheep. Imagine that for every single one of those squares, but more. The farther out you go, the more sheep there would be, because the more chunk overlapping there would be. When building your train, it's important to remember that each corner will be connected. So if you're building something that has any height to it, you're going to want to make sure you put it in the middle, or you make sure every corner is lined up perfectly to where it will keep doing it. So say you're building some terrain. Basically what's going to happen is it's going to plop that area with the diamond right there. So you're going to want to make sure that's connected. It's going to put the area with the redstone right there. And it's also going to put the area of the bedrock right there. It's going to make a bunch of corners interlocking and connected. So that'll continue on and carry on. And if you're trying to build a wall, you're going to want to make sure it's connected, or a mountain, really anything. You can't just put it in the corner and don't finish it. You're probably going to want to put any mountains that you make in the middle. So this is just a little demonstration, a little silly demonstration. So, you know, there's nothing there unless you... Now, this is before it loads in. This is all ahead of time, so you won't see what's happening until it happens. Let's see if I line that up correctly. So the diamond will then be replicated, and that doesn't line up perfectly, but you get the idea. You get the point. It's important to remember this, because then you just have these terrible-looking, unless you really want that design, of just walls, and it looks like really scuffed generation, and that you will have for every single one of them.
Working. It's definitely working.
Alright, so this is the final example. Me and my friends spent ages building a massive chunk. I advise
I did it layer by layer, and I did it on a timer.
And I put a very slow timer on it. And as you can see, chunk overlap and used right there, that campfire already has beef, which
see, we've run into that
which means that every other time the chunk overlap, because the farther out you go, the more chunk overlap will happen. Can happen. It's not a guaranteed thing.
Chunks being offset?
And
no, I don't think
problem with the placing, you notice it's placing by
much longer
layer.
Timer.
Is you lose the dripstone and glow berries, which I'll
have
to go in and try to fix that, or leave it, I don't really know.
Now, it is harder to reload.
So you're just going to want to go ahead and easy.
You just have to break it.
Go smaller, and if it ever stops, you just have to break your wall and hit the reload button.
I probably should have done a smaller chunk.
Start it back up again, starting the process.
There is a way to make it even bigger past the structure block border.
Starting an exponential function.
The border is 64. That's the max you can
and
go.
Every time chunk overlaps happens, it starts
set it to where it's bigger.
So
as you can see, the terrain is generating. This is repeating terrain, however. So, if somebody wants an emerald vein, they just have to mine 64 blocks in any direction.
So, now ore generation, you're going to notice, like, if you're mining
another vein of
and you find diamonds, well, depending upon how big you make it, currently that one is 64, the max that it can be. It might actually be 63.
I did it place by layer and an animation.
Well, then if you dig 63 blocks in an X or Z coordinate, then you will run into the same ore, because ores are repeating. So chunks are repeating.
Working.
Because everything is just a clone of itself.
It's definitely
so over here, it's struggling
slower than I expected.
But if you go in and load down a redstone,
easier to do this layer by layer.
Lined up you know, kind of far away, because it's a
I'm
big,
trying to think of where the redstone
big thing.
is, because
So
it's very easy
you're
to
gonna want to make sure you have
unload
the redstone loaded in.
So we'd be doing.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, drop a comment and I'll try to respond on them.